and welcome to the Radiant Astrology Podcast. I'm your host, Christina Caudill, and in today's episode, we're going to be exploring the Cancer Ingress, known as the Summer Solstice here in the Northern Hemisphere. Our friends in the Southern Hemisphere are experiencing the Winter Solstice. And it's a very interesting chart. As we know, Jupiter recently ingressed Cancer. So we have that really sort of adding to the overall flavor of the chart. And before we dive into that, I want to introduce my trusty co-host, the astrologer Melissa LaFara from Energetic Principles Podcast. Hello, Melissa. Thank you so much for joining me again.
Hello, hello. Thanks for having me, Christina. It is we're in dynamic times, right? So I'm excited to talk about this ingress chart.
Yes, and the ingress chart is really interesting because I think anyone who is interested in anything connected to astrology or mythology or nature, these moments of the year are especially sort of exhilarating because we know that we are aligning and attuning to the shifts of nature following the sun. So, we're experiencing the summer solstice here in the United States as this ingress happens, which is on Friday, June 20th. And so we're eagerly awaiting the sun to get to 0 degrees of tropical Cancer. And then the moment that ingress happens, then that chart we cast is sort of like the birth chart for that season. And I love hearing Melissa explore these things from a mundane perspective, and also, what kinds of things we want to be on the lookout for, what kinds of things we might be able to expect. We'll delve into all that. But first, before we get into that, we have a very exciting announcement. We are going to be co-hosting a astrology summit coming up August 8th through 10th. So it's a long weekend of astrology with 20 top astrologers, astrology luminaries. And the title of the summit is Revolution Rising, Astrology for the Zeitgeist. And we're going to be gathering in community, and each astrologer is going to be presenting their most important wisdom aligned with the cosmos of these times for the zeitgeist. And Melissa, you want to tell us a little bit about what you have in store for the summit?
Well, there's so much going on in the skies, which we'll get into here with this ingress chart soon. But it had me thinking as we twist the planets around into our mundane narratives and we think about these big conjunctions taking place and the impending Saturn-Neptune conjunction. I was really, I'm a Cancerian myself, so yeah, go Cancer season.
Yes.
But I really was thinking from a self-care standpoint, because when we have such big energies going on in the sky, how do we as people navigate within it so we can actually make a difference in the collective? Because if we are not operating at our best, at our fullest, and in our own personal power, it can be really hard to try to navigate the entire world, or even meeting a couple people versus making a difference in the world. And we all make a difference in our own way, of course. And that is what I'm going to be talking about, is how do we get into our individual power? How do we move through things like burnout, outdated mindsets or belief systems, just anxieties in general, and how do we own that personal power? Because the collective is essentially all us ones, all us Aries running around, and we make that up. So that is going to be my talk, is to help soothe so we can be our best selves.
Oh, I love that. Because you don't have to be an astrologer to know that things are pretty crazy in the world right now. But I think what's so beautiful is how astrology can be a tool to help us see things from a different perspective. And then also what you do once you have this, greater insight and knowledge about how things are going to unfold. What's your role in it? How can you, as you were going to be talking about, Melissa, how can you help to manage the energy for yourself personally so that you can serve this time? And I think that's a beautiful way to approach it. I myself am going to be taking a little spin on some of the discussions you and I have had on dreams and astrology. And so I'll be talking about outer planets as dream makers in my talk on dreaming the zeitgeist. And so we've had so much fun looking at people's dreams, looking at their natal charts and their transits and progressions. And I thought during this time when the collective is going through so much transition, that we're all experiencing it on some level personally, and that is likely coming through our dreams. And when I think of the zeitgeist astrologically, really the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are very much, these big movers and shakers. And so, when we have transits by these outer planets to our natal chart, what is that trying to tell us in terms of, what is the message from the soul that is trying to get through to us, that's trying to break through to our consciousness? And so I'll be sort of putting in some of these themes that we can expect to see. And then also during these times of great transition, which can bring up great fear, but also great possibility. What are some of these themes that may be coming through our dreams that are really, it's really a higher intelligence trying to get through to us, which is so incredibly fascinating. So I hope you all will join us for Revolution Rising, Astrology for the Zeitgeist. It's a free online summit. Did I mention that? It's free to attend for the 3 days. You will also get a 24-hour access to the replays. You can also upgrade if you choose. No pressure though, but if you choose to get even more out of the summit, you can upgrade to the All Access Pass. We will have 3 astrologer live roundtables where we'll have the astrologers all together discussing some important topics like the astrology of the United States, the astrology of 2026, and also the Uranus Pluto trine in air signs, which will be happening at that time in early August. Actually, I think it starts in late July. But everybody's going to be focused on that too. So having a lot of astrologers with different perspectives come together, I think will be a very exciting thing. And it will also be on the Jupiter Venus conjunction in Cancer, Jupiter sign of exaltation. So I think that's a great opportunity to come together and support one another in our community that is so precious to us, the community of astrology. And I hope you'll join us. So you can find the link in the show notes below, or you can visit radiantastrology.com/summit 2025. All right. So got that out of the way. So let's dive into this Cancer chart. Well, before I share the chart, is there anything you wanted to say to kind of set the scene first, or to help anyone who's sort of new to looking at ingress charts, at what they should maybe be considering, Melissa?
Well, when we're looking at ingress charts for the each season, we, of course, many people have heard about the Aries ingress chart. That's the one that sets up the themes for the year. And it's all based on the solar position because that is what's ingressing into a new sign. So in mundane astrology, we always want to know what are the people in power doing? The sun is essentially the person in power in your given area or world powers. And this helps us to decipher where those energies are going. And so there is a solar focus here. And one thing, and really, if you think about it, as Christina was talking about earlier, as these being the marking points of the seasons themselves, these are great 4 seasons. If you're into witchcraft, there's that lovely 8 pi going on, that lunar touch. But these 4 seasons is really what makes up the tropical zodiac as it is, and that's what us Western astrologers practice. So there is a lot of power in looking at that too, because it is what sets up our zodiac. But I will do a disclaimer as we go into this Cancer ingress that the Aries ingress is considered the head of all ingresses, right? And depending on where the ingress is telling us, with the rising sign, will tell us how impactful following ingresses will be, like the Cancer one, the Libra one, or the Capricorn one. And our ingress in for Aries in 2025, we had a fixed ascendant. So that really stabilizes that chart. So what we're going to talk about here today is going to color some of that energy, but it's not like this chart is going to take over for that chart. This chart is just adding some filters and some nuance to bigger themes that were seated in the Aries ingress.
Hmm. And so for this next season, from now the Cancer ingress to the Libra ingress, the fall equinox in the Northern Hemisphere, is this, we can consider this chart though being sort of focused in these few seasons primarily.
Yes, this is where we're going to see these layers and this emphasis start to come alive. And really, if you think about when we're layering anything, it's not like it necessarily stops right after, the fall equinox comes around. The fall equinox will then build upon this layer, right? So that's the context of time. There's no start and beginning. It all feeds into one another. It's continuous in that sense. But now we're getting a new layer to add to our ever evolving cake that will then
Mhm.
color how the fall looks.
All right, great. Sounds good. So hope you all got that. And let's go ahead and share the Cancer Ingress chart. Let me see. Melissa, can you see the chart?
I do see it.
Good. Okay, so let's see. So for our audience is watching online, and you can see that the sun is at 0000 Cancer. We're using a whole sign chart, and so it is in the sixth house here, and it will ingress June 20th, 2025 at 10:43 p.m. Eastern Time, and this chart is cast for Washington, D.C. So it's primarily focused on United States, where we both live. And so this, we're looking at the United States. Sometimes I like to look at sort of things more generally with the Aries, zero Aries chart, but so much is happening here in the United States. It's worth, focusing on like this particular area of the world and what we can see, for us collectively. Um, and, like we said, because we're tracking the sun, we want to put a special emphasis on the sun and the aspects that the sun is making. I would say secondarily, we tend to look at the sun is of leaders in general, usually the leader of the country, and then the moon tends to represent the people or the emotional nature of the collective at that time. And so, again, this is for these next few months for the season of summer. And then we see the moon in Taurus, which is the sign where it's exalted. So let's see. First of all, the sun in Cancer, Jupiter just entered Cancer. What was it, like a week or two ago? Like I have
10
no sense
days
of
ago,
time these
or
days.
11 days ago on June 9th.
Okay, perfect. So it takes Jupiter about 12 years to do an entire orbital cycle, right, around the zodiac. So, it's a fairly rare occurrence, right? And Jupiter spends about a year in each sign. So it's significant that, for this Cancer ingress, we have Jupiter there in the sign where it is exalted, meaning Jupiter is especially Jupiterian. And I tend to, we can think of Jupiter as the planet of abundance, of generosity, of protection, of wisdom, higher mind, higher thinking. And it's in the archetype of Cancer, which is that the water sign. It's a cardinal sign, so it's which all of these solstices and equinox are in the cardinal signs, which is like a new beginning, right? A new beginning of a season. And Cancer is the sign of nurturance, care. It's the archetype of the mother, that sense of family. It's ruled by the moon. And, so when we think of Cancer season and all the things that Cancer is associated with family security, emotional security, protection. This year we're going to get even more like an abundance of this kind of archetype in the collective. And we can be fortunate in these types of things, in these areas too, like where we're generous, where we want to help, helping nature, neighbors, helping family, helping those like family, those that we have an emotional connection with. And so, the sun focused here, with Jupiter. Now it's said that because Jupiter right now is about 2 degrees from the sun, it is considered, under the beams of the sun, not as strong as it normally is for this particular moment in time. But Melissa, do you want to add anything to this Sun Jupiter kind of focus that we're starting with?
Yes. So, and I will say just real quick as we look at the planets here in this configuration is one thing to remember is we have this chart set for Washington, which we've already stated is a US influence. And these planets will look the same for anywhere on the planet, anywhere location you're at, or any country you might want to cast it for if you live in another country. It'll be the same, but the chart will change. So as we talk about these different influences in the houses that they're in, we all have the same planetary signatures going on, but they will interact with different areas of life for the countries. So with Jupiter there, I think I'm a big fan of looking at, well, obviously we're going to get into the aspects here, but I think about timelines essentially. And as you pointed out, with the sun essentially being the slower planet and moving towards Jupiter, the sun is Jupiter is in a combustion state, but the sun is moving towards it. Whereas Jupiter here, we're talking about the generosity in Jupiter being exalted and lifting up, and we want good things to come of this Jupiter. It's a very poignant Jupiter for the United States because essentially we're reaching our Jupiter return here. So if you know anything about the Sibley chart, we have Jupiter in the same place in the US chart. I believe it's about 3 degrees of Cancer. And there is a lot of tension with Jupiter being in the square aspect with Saturn and Neptune, which Christine and I'm sure, are going to talk a lot about here too. But why I want to bring that up on a surface level is that Jupiter is moving away from that tension. And the sun is moving towards Jupiter. So there's something to be said here if the sun is representative of our ruler or, the main people in power, it has to go through the Saturn. It has to go through the Neptune, which the Jupiter character has already been through here. So I think this is there's a lot of lovely aspects to what this Jupiter can bring us, but it's not one that doesn't come with a lot of tension and rebalancing and um pretty much crossroads energy, which we already feel. I don't know about you, Christina, but it's big crossroads in the world right now. And so, how do we get this benefic energy and utilize it while knowing that it's not all, um, you know, daisies and flowers right now? It makes me think of the idea of the silver lining. It's like, how can we move through things at this time, knowing that even if we're going through difficulties or there's a lot to sort out, how do we access the silver lining within what's going on in the world?
Mhm. Yeah, because like just alone, like a pure Sun Jupiter in Cancer, you would think, Jupiter wants to make everyone happy and feel abundant and everything like that. But when we first consider, it's just had the square to Saturn, but it's still sort of within that energy. And Saturn restricts, whereas Jupiter wants expansion and freedom. So there's that tension there. And then the Neptune, it's still, pretty close to that Neptune square. I often think of Neptune and Jupiter a square. Any square with Jupiter is like a binge. Like Jupiter wants to binge on all the good things, right? And but the Neptune can make things very either confused or sometimes maybe kind of blown out of proportion or huge hopes and huge disappointment and that kind of thing. But as you said, it's kind of coming out of that. It's like sort of emerging from that. I think that we as a collective have experienced a lot of, this undulation of like hope and then disappointment and despair, but yet I feel like, as you said, with the Jupiter separating from that, that there may have been, it may be emerging from like, we've come through a transition period. And yet the sun, which may, be the leader or any major leaders, still has yet to be, fully experiencing that Saturn Neptune. And when you think of the sun, which is a focus, like your conscious focus, conscious identity, the role you play, to me, I would think in general, the role any leaders play may be ready, have to contend with some restrictions of Saturn or maybe even denials. And Neptunian, like, does this role still is still relevant? Is your purpose or even your talents or gifts or whatever you have to serve, do they still are they still needed? Are they still necessary? All these things that like the Neptune can kind of blur the edges of that solar purpose. And so I think we may see that in terms of, any kind of leader, like what is a leader even? And I think Jupiter Sun can also be, at its best, a inspiring leader, a compassionate leader, and that kind of thing. Whereas I'm wondering if the Saturn Neptune square is kind of challenging and asking those questions, what is leadership? Who is worthy of being in the spotlight. And there could be challenges to that. There could be even, a dissolving of someone's central purpose through that.
Yeah, I feel like and typically the sun is always going to represent uh if we were going to go for clear cut, it's going to represent the head of the nation, which for us here in the United States is Donald Trump. And this, to me, is an indicator, even though if you're sitting with Jupiter, uh, Jupiter is in the room, right? But there is no way to get to Jupiter without going through Saturn and Neptune. So to me, that speaks a lot to any type of big agenda or massive growth or elevated position. It's going to be challenged by this Saturn Neptune piece, because there's just no way of getting around it. If you think about an obstacle and it's like right in front of you and like you have no choice but to deal with it. And I think that is a big issue that is going on right now, and especially with matters of sixth house matters. We think about sixth house, we think about the laborers of the country and the unions. And I know that's a big thing going on right now too, is, union strikes and getting better fair deals for the workers, and just the workforce in general, as we have these, uh, especially our more service jobs, because that is a big issue that's going on right now, as there are these forces going through these service jobs and taking away people that work there, like the quote unquote undocumented immigrants, which I think is horrible personally. That's going to affect that's going to affect the service industries. It's going to affect trade. It's going to affect job flow. I think we're going to see it a lot in the news. I think the news is going to be, especially with all this third house emphasis with Saturn and Neptune there, it's like a lot of this is going to be publicized, and yeah, just tension around making moves there. Um,
Hmm. Yeah, and I think, yeah, because the sixth house, like you said, that can represent things like service workers. And the other thing that has been in the news is this big, beautiful bill. And even the name of it sounds very Jupiter Neptune
I
to me,
know.
where it's big and it's beautiful, but it's also kind of
Wow.
like, what, it's just a ball of wax. But there's word that it's taking away health care from a lot of people. I think mostly undocumented immigrants, also potentially the elderly. And so that care of cancer, and also the sixth house is health care. That can be a huge theme that is obviously something coming up now that I think will continue, and maybe the fight around it.
Yeah.
With the Neptune square, maybe that's that dissolving of it, but then coming up with the Saturn can also be, there could be a resistance to that. There could be legislation that is, either for or against it. So, I see often the Neptune wants to dissolve or change or even take away, but the Saturn isn't giving up either, and they're both at the sign of the fight. They're in battles. And this battle of the square of the Aries to the Cancer, that certainly is part of the nature of that.
Yeah, and I think even you just now bringing up Saturn is a significator for the elderly. Saturn is a significator for it was the in the traditional astrology it was the last planet we could see with our eyes. So a lot of times it was associated with people who are on the fringe or people who are marginalized in some way. And so those two populations of people are coming up in contention with this Sun Jupiter signature. And it really makes me also think about recently we're seeing, veterans fight back because they're losing their health care or their benefits that are, a big perk about joining the military is that you are cared for and it's not just the benefits with the health care, it's benefits with, I saw an article today about benefits that are being slashed from money that helps veterans be housed in their homes, which is a very Cancerian signature too. So we're seeing these cuts happen to military personnel, which I would think if I was in the military currently, if I was looking out for my own security and my own survival, which are two key words for both Cancer and Aries, there is like security and survival, I would maybe be a little questionable about what does this look like. And I think that might be the Saturn Neptune piece with a lot of this too, is people are disillusioned by what's going on. And it's can be confusing because we have no clear-cut path of where this is all going. But we know, what we have to stand up for. We know what we might have to fight for. And I think that's a big component with the moon signature and the moon making a trine to Mars. So I think there is this, okay, let's get real here. What actually matters? What what do I have to, dig in and organize to protect or fight for?
And the fact that the moon is ruling all of those Cancer planets, Sun, Jupiter, and also Mercury. And as you said, I think we mentioned before, the moon can be the people or the general mood of the nation. And that trying to Mars, I think it trying to Mars, especially in Earth signs, can be good for, there's nothing stopping us. We're moving forward. We're getting in action, even though Taurus is known as the ultimate procrastinator, right? But as you said, it can also be that determination that rather than it being a flash in the pan, some one day fight and getting noisy, it's more about just maybe even not even making noise, but just getting into action, having that determination, taking practical steps, practical action of both, Taurus and Virgo, um, and maybe even fighting, Mars on the level of Virgo, which is, crossing all your T's and dotting all your I's and making sure everything is done right or done in the right way. And also being sort of the humble warrior too. It's just like, the people who are potentially on the front lines or doing this, moving things forward on the societal level could be those who are, in humble positions, whether it's government workers, whether it's just people, average citizens or something like that. But that generally the moon, the moon, as we said, is exalted in Taurus. Taurus is the sign of survival on one level, biological survival, survival of, shelter and protection and things like that, which is also sort of echoes all this Cancer. It's really about the really taking care of the practical matters. Because I think when we're dealing with things that are, say, political, and it's like we have these political ideologies. I think we're getting past just the ideological part about kind of what makes us angry in general to what are we going to do on the ground to protect people, to protect those people in our neighborhoods, in our kitchens, in our schools, or wherever they are to actually like help with, making a difference in the kind of society that we want.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's results oriented. That's what this is. It's like we want results and we know it's not going to be fast. And so it's going to be this plotted pace, which Taurus is really good at because if Taurus feels, um, passionately about something or wants to see manifestation take place, nothing's going to get in the way of that. And there is something to note with the moon being at 0 degrees too. So this could be the start of a story that is kicking off here, where it's just in the infancy of making moves and plotting out plans and taking those first steps. And it makes me think too, because the midheaven there in the top of the chart was always that 10th house energy is associated with the leader too. And so we see the leader as Mars energy in that eighth house space. And then we see sort of the leader as that sun in the sixth house place. And as leadership, I wouldn't say those are the strongest places to be in. So I feel like if anybody is really concerned about the executive branch having a heavy hand, I feel like there is a lot of stops to that right now, and there might be an attempt to balance that out. I know recently Trump has pulled back with ICE seizures going into places like agriculture, to the restaurant industry, to these service-oriented industries that feed us, right? We think about Taurus, we think about Cancer, and
Nourishment.
disrupting those systems too much is going to really bite back. And there has to be some foresight. And maybe that's where Jupiter can come in. Like, is there some level of foresight that can help us out here? Because making some of these moves can be really detrimental down the road. And a lot of people might are kind of waiting for this time period too, because the tariffs having been such a big factor in the earlier part of the year, it takes time for those changes to roll out amongst the economy and how it will affect us on the shelves of grocery stores or job markets. And this is about the time when those things are going to take place. So I think some sort of rebalancing act or working together has to, even if it's not what anybody wants to do, it almost, you have to like, you know, repair, because repair a situation.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because you said, the midheaven is also the leader, the midheaven and the sun. And then, I've always heard the moon is the people, but you had also said to me before that the first house often also represents the people in a mundane chart.
Yes.
And so here we have Pluto in Aquarius on the ascendant, which to me, ever since Pluto got into Aquarius, that is, the potential for people power, going through that alchemy of that pressure of the near death, in order to be reborn. So it definitely feels like this, and then the moon is coming to square that Pluto too. So there's really this deep emotional transformation of Pluto can be relentless, and maybe that is that sort of awakening on an inner level for a lot of people, that because it's going to take a lot of energy and a lot of strategy and determination for, I guess, the majority of people to make a difference when there is a consolidated, group of very rich people at the top ruling the country, or even just, a handful of people. So I think on an emotional level that um, Moon square Pluto can also be this signification of a deep emotional transformation to potentially, and when we think Aquarius, social programs, societal potential progress, the idea, what would progress look like, in these times when things are massively, being rolled back, protections for people being rolled back. And then that stellium in the fourth house in Taurus with Venus, the ruler of Taurus, there. So, Venus, obviously, we often think of money and resources, and she's in her rulership in Taurus, which is very concerned with these things, the money and resources. And but interestingly, Venus and Uranus are there very, especially Uranus is pretty much conjunct the IC of the chart, which can kind of have that sense of that, instability, at the bottom of the home, of the roots. What do you make of this with Venus there and Uranus? Because I feel like if it was just Uranus, I would think completely, things toppling over from the ground up, the roots being ripped up. But Venus being in the sign where she is, in her earth sign, her yin earth sign, I'm I can't help but think that there is some kind of silver lining there when it comes to money and resources.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at this chart just from a rulership standpoint, Venus ends up being the final dispositor of the chart. So the whole chart is essentially dictated by Venus there. And I kind of like her being sandwiched between the IC and Uranus there. Because in mundane astrology, the fourth house is connected with, I mean, it can be connected with land, with agriculture, with, just the foundation, but it's also the opposite of the 10th, which is the people in charge. So usually if we see a packed fourth house or there's a lot of fourth house activity, there is essentially potentially a group of rebels that are coming for the power. And I mean, we don't think about, I mean, Uranus gets the label of rebel all the time. We might not think of us that being the case with Venus, although Venus is known, especially in more ancient times, to be a warrior herself. She's very much aligned with war or fighting back, especially when she is in her morning star phase, which she is because we just
She
went
is
through
now.
a a Venus retrograde earlier this year. So she is in what is considered her warrior phase. So I like this in the sense of how do we unify together in this slow and steady, grounded way to deal with this pressure of needing to usurp something and to be um a lot of times when things crumble, it's not from the top to which it crumbles. It's there's a crack in the foundation, right? And so it makes me think of some sort of crack in the foundation that can be organized and gathered around. And especially with Uranus being, it's the only outer right now that isn't at the beginning degrees of a new sign. It is a very old story that is still playing out at 29 degrees. So I like to think of this as some sort of organization of the people or a continual movement there. You were talking about earlier with the ascendant being in Aquarius near Pluto there. We could also look at Saturn because Saturn rules Aquarius traditionally. And so the people are in the Saturnian place, they're fallen in Aries. There's this Neptunian connection. Although Neptune can very much unify from a compassionate principle, especially when people are down. How do we come together? And then Uranus is sort of the other side where this individual focus, where Uranus can be incredibly individualistic. And that's why we find rebels who go against the thing because it's in the cause of their individual, motivations. But I feel like this is, if it's not the people that are doing this, although I feel the people will be doing this on some level, it could also be potentially, the wealthier class that might not be agreeing, especially since Elon Musk has left the building with, left the White
Hmm.
House and other, maybe the tech companies or, these big companies aren't in alignment anymore. And so they're like, hold on, we got power here too. How can we organize to stir the pot?
And quietly, maybe,
Yes.
discreetly, so nobody knows until boom, Uranus decides to show its face. And you had said earlier to me before we were recording that, interestingly enough, the sun, again, is sort of central focus of this ingress chart, and it rules Leo, which rules the seventh house. So if we think of Donald Trump's alliances, they have been, not very steady, not very good. Even with some of his, big partners like Netanyahu, it's like hot and cold, and of course that big blow up with Elon Musk, and I think they're kind of playing nice now, but you have a sense, no, that something, they're no longer one unit. They're no longer strong together. They're both kind of vulnerable. So when that sun, which rules the descendant, is in the sixth house, it's because seventh house is equal relationships, and then when you get into sixth house, it's like unequal or having to, or having to be humble or even humiliated, I think. One extreme of the sixth house. Did you want to say anything more about that, about those sort of alliances, partnerships, and things like that?
Yeah, I think because it's a big focus right now in the US and in the world is the seventh house is these partnerships, these alliances, but they're also are open enemies, they're foreign relations. And here we see that ruler of that house in the sixth house, but if we turn the chart then it's in the 12th place from the seventh house. So what that means is there's an aversion to this area of the chart where dealing with our allies or our enemies is maybe not in a direct way. I feel like maybe there can be maybe some backdoor deals going on here, or there's a lot of talks behind the scenes that are just not made public yet, whether it's with our own leadership or the leadership of other countries in relation to us. And there could be an enemy that we don't see coming. I mean, the 12th house is traditionally a place of hidden enemies. So if our enemies are the sun ruling the seventh house, and it's hidden, in the 12th from the seventh, in what is known as derivative charts, turning the chart. There might be a lot of stuff that's going on behind the scenes right now that we might not know about, whether we're directly involved or it doesn't involve us at all, and it will involve us at some point down the road.
Yeah, and it makes me even think too of that Mars and even K2 in the eighth house, which is another sort of hidden house, so maybe some hidden dangers or something like that that we're not quite seeing yet. And let's see, the other thing we
Well,
hadn't
that's actually
talked, oh, go ahead.
for what you were just saying. I think that's important to pick up on too, because the sun is also moving to sextile Mars, which is known as the planet that has to do with, aggression or the military or warring factions. And those two are working together, but they're in these hidden places. And so we'll see how that pans out.
Hmm. And another thing that we hadn't talked about was I noticed even though the moon has past its conjunction with Chiron and Aries, I would still consider it conjunct. So there is, and again, when we think about the collective mood, Chiron in Aries is, the wounded warrior. I think we're all feeling wounded on some level. And I think, and to me, that also echoes a lot of these things, like when you said like wounded vets and things like that, not having the protection. And almost like there's a real feeling collectively of like protecting the vulnerable and maybe fighting for that because of Chiron being in the warrior sign of, again, the average person being on the front lines. We just saw like massive protests in the United States, and it takes, the average person to actually essentially be on the front lines and even, protesting. Unfortunately, today one can feel like you're basically on these battle lines. But we also have this sense of, the wounds with us, that feeling of wound or pain or what have you that Chiron represents, can also be a driver, especially in a sign like Aries, can be that motivator. We're motivated because of, feeling wounded or because of wanting to help those who are wounded, or have been wounded by, whatever's going on in the country.
Mm, yeah. It's yeah, that I feel like that Chiron story has been going on for a while, ever since we had the a few years ago when we had the eclipse right on Chiron. You remember the solar eclipse right on Chiron? It feels like
Mm.
it's been activated ever since. And really Mercury is
Mhm.
moving towards that, even though the moon's moving away from that. Mercury is uh forming a square slowly but surely with that Chiron placement too. And
Mm.
as you were talking, it made me think, because I didn't then started looking at Mercury and I was like, oh, Mercury hasn't got any lip service here yet.
Yeah.
But Mercury has a lot to do with, it has to do with the education system, it has to do with like transactional things, the movement back and forth, sort of this transportational aspect. But when I was thinking about the transactional piece of it, I was thinking about the second house ruler being in the sixth house and being combust, right? So we see Jupiter near the sun here, and the second house being this place of commodities and the economy. And it just had me thinking about it not being in the best place as far as maybe a continual slow inflation kind of situation going on. Um, Especially since all those Cancer planets are ruled by that Taurus moon there that's exalted, and it's tapping into the agriculture and the land. So it makes me think of like maybe everyday goods or things that we need um just to survive, to keep us healthy, to do our jobs. That might there just might be some inflation or fluctuation of pricing around that during this time.
Mm. Yeah, and traditionally Mercury also rules, well, you said transactions, so business in general. Um, and with the Mercury square Chiron, that can bring up that sense of vulnerability. And I think a lot of small business owners or all kinds of business people, but when I think of sixth house, I think of Chiron and Aries, because being an entrepreneur, a small business person, you're always kind of having to do battle every day. You're having to be self-sufficient and being a survivor. And so what's on the mind, usually we think of Mercury, what's on our mind is how do we take care, in a Cancer way of our families, of our communities, when we're also feeling, vulnerable because of not knowing which way the wind is going to turn with the tariffs or with the economy and things like that. So that could be, that anxiety around that feeling vulnerable around, the economy. And also with the lunar nodes, the North Node in Pisces in the second house, as you said, of the economy, that the nodes really suggest, a transition, or the North Node can be potential for growth in some ways. But as you said, with Jupiter being that traditional ruler of Pisces and it's combust and in the sixth house, and when you said inflation, I mean, I often think of the North Node as very Jupiter-like, and it can be inflationary too, like not always a good thing, And in, I think, Vedic astrology, they think of the North Node as Rahu as this hunger, this like insatiable hunger, like you can't get enough or, wanting and desiring more and more and more. So sometimes when we don't know that, when the bottom is going to fall off, we tend to maybe even binge or over consume and things like that, just out of that fear of lack.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think about you just see that hungry dragon head just blah, taking it all in. Yeah, so that is I could see that for sure.
All
And as you
right.
were
So as
speaking,
you want to
oh,
wrap up? Oh, I was
oh
just
yeah.
going to say if you have some final thoughts while we wrap up here. I think we've covered it pretty good, but
Yeah,
but keep going.
I guess my final thought here is in relation to maybe I have two thoughts, but I'll make them quick and wrap it up. One would be maybe some tension within these like the primary education system because the third house rules not colleges per se, but all, the elementary, the middle schools, the high schools, and there's been a lot of movement forward to cut programs around these areas, which could affect the youth, which Mercury also represents, the youth population and children population not being in the best position here either. Um, and it also got me thinking about just because one of the big things that's going on right now is everything ends up in court, right? Everything ends up in court right now. And essentially, that's when we're looking to Jupiter. So I would imagine the Sun and Jupiter together are definitely going to amplify court cases, whether there being more of them, whether there being high profile cases. But don't, I feel like there's might not be as much done because of that Saturn Neptune square. Or maybe there are things that are done, but they're not in favor of the people in power, which we know the person in power really doesn't like that. So there could be a lot of contention and blocking by the legal system of maybe what the sun's agenda might be. And maybe we'll see some high profile cases around things like labor unions and service industries because they're being highlighted right now. So we might see some court case
Mhm.
breakthroughs in that area too.
One thing that I want to mention, okay, because when it comes to higher education, we tend to think of the ninth house, and the ruler of the ninth house here is Venus, which is down there at the bottom of the chart. And when you had said that there were maybe groups, Venus can represent some of those people who are kind of working behind this and make a difference and things like that. I'm wondering if, the higher education world, because they are finally saying, we want to protect, our livelihood, our students, our way of life and things like that. And I think they've been slow to act, but some of them are starting to band together and get stronger. I think there was a court case that was thrown out. I want to say it was Columbia University. I think it was their faculty, and it was thrown out because the judge who was appointed by Trump, but said that like they basically it wasn't legally sound, and there were all these legal reasons why, like they didn't have the right something that they were suing for. They didn't have a focus, then they didn't have enough of blah blah blah. So kind of like they had to go back and they said they weren't going to back down, but they had to go back to the drawing board. So that kind of sounds very Mars in Virgo to me. It's like, okay, look, if you're going to do this, you're going to do it right. You got to take the time to do it right. You got to get it legally sound, cross all of your T's, dot your I's, make sure you know the law, that kind of thing.
Uh,
So I'm wondering if that could be represented, by that particular fight.
Yeah, I was just thinking that as you were saying that. I was thinking, know the law, know the law, know the steps, know the details. With any of this because I think that's where you fight. You fight in the weeds essentially right now.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Melissa. I'm actually really interested to see how all of these energies and archetypes and symbols come to life because all we know that we can try to divine as much as we can, but the universe always, has a plan in store. So I'll be definitely reading the headlines and comparing it to this Ingress chart. And thank you so much for exploring this with me. Where can our listeners find you if they want more energetic principles in their life?
Well, you can find me at energeticprinciples.com. You can also find me on Instagram at energeticprinciples. And really, I think the best thing to do is to sign up for my monthly newsletter, The Heavenly Wind, which goes out at the beginning of the month, and I'll always give a breakdown of what's going on. And that's where I share mostly right now. But of course, sign up for the summit. Sign up and
Yes, I was
register
going
for
to
the
say, make a
summit.
plug for the summit.
We're gonna be there. We're gonna be I'm excited about my talk. I'm excited about everybody's talk. It's quite the lineup. And the roundtables are gonna be great. So I'm just gonna do a plug right now because I got my Mercury oil on. But get that all access pass. It's the cheapest it's gonna be right now. And you want those roundtables, you want the bonuses, you want to be able to watch this at a later date because I'm telling you, 20 people speaking back to back. No brain can take that in, nor would you want to. We want to slow down to Taurus levels, Taurus moon level, and let it seep in slowly. So definitely register and hopefully you will get that pass.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you to all our listeners. If you'd like more Radiant Astrology, definitely sign up for my free newsletter at radiantastrology.com. You'll also get more information on the upcoming summit, and also any notification for my podcast, which kind of comes and goes as I like feel the motivation for it. But and I appreciate you, Melissa, as always being my trusty, co-explorer. So thank you, and we will see you at the summit, hopefully.
Yes.
And otherwise, you can find me on Instagram at Radiant Astrology, and we will see you again soon. Bye for now.